Hey guys, in this video I'd like to talk a little bit about epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, theory of knowledge, and one of the first and most popular and common themes in epistemology is to ask the question, what is knowledge? We could talk about how we gain knowledge. Well, what counts as knowledge? What is knowledge is a very kind of classic question that runs throughout epistemology. We'll look at Plato, his book, The Theaetetus. In that short story, the main character, Socrates, is asking this question to his interlocutors. I'm so curious, what is knowledge anyways? I mean, people talk about knowledge of carpentry and knowledge of this, knowledge that that's the case. But that's kind of like saying, what is clay? And someone answering, well, there's the clay of the potter, there's the clay that the bricklayers use, and so on. But what is it? And so Socrates and his interlocutors kind of explore this question a little more deeply. What is maybe it's kind of a perception, like it's the same as our sensory perception, like what we see, what we smell. Maybe it's a kind of memory. Can a person have knowledge, greater or lesser degrees of knowledge, or greater or lesser degrees of sensation? And that's very classic Socrates, talking about opposites and greater and lesser, and kind of drawing these interesting kind of puzzles. And also, very fundamental questions like, what is the building block of knowledge? He gives this analogy of a word, or a letter within a word, or a syllable within a letter. Maybe like our letter W might have some multiple syllables. Like, what is a fundamental element of knowledge in this case? Certainly I think it's fair to say that the concept of true justified belief is present in Plato's writing, even though if we can be a little anachronistic about that and read that into it, still definitely Plato raises some big challenges to this definition of knowledge as being true justified belief, which has been quite a predominant view throughout history, that the definition of knowledge is TBJ, true justified belief. And that strikes me as a little odd. I guess it's useful to have definitions so we know we're on the same page, we know what we're talking about. But it sort of seems like the argument is the definition of knowledge is true justified belief. Here is a true justified belief. This is true. This is a belief, and this is someone believes it, and they have justifications. Therefore, that is knowledge. But it strikes me that Plato's starting point is that I don't know. I don't know the truth, and that's the struggle right there. We're saying, are we assuming that this is true and then saying therefore that's knowledge? Or are we saying that, how do you know something is true? Because someone with knowledge tells you? Or we just say we have the truth and then we can figure out what knowledge is and is not, right? So there's these kind of very interesting elements in Plato. I guess going along in history a little bit, we have, of course, the Cynics, academic Cynics, somewhat connected with Plato's school, who held that people do not have knowledge, there is no knowledge. And the more Pyrrhonian school, which was kind of like, Sextus Empiricus is a great example of the Pyrrhonian school of thought. And they're more like, I don't know, maybe there's knowledge, maybe there's not. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And they claim to find a lot of peace in that. And that's an interesting point too, because I know for me in my life I've certainly struggled with concepts of ambiguity and not knowing, and kind of being like, oh, I need to know for sure, right? And being able to be like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? And letting go a little bit. Out of the Pyrrhonian school came an interesting kind of model called the Agrippa's trilemma, which basically argues that maybe I'll pause for a second. Actually, I shouldn't, before I continue on there. let's talk a little bit about this true justified belief framework for a minute. So first, there's the element of truth. So again, the question is, okay, truth, how do you know that? And I don't see a lot of people talking about that. That doesn't seem to be a major aspect. Again, there is a very obscure term called the lithology. Like in some obscure medieval text, it's defined as the study of this element of truth. And certainly people claim to know truth or to have truth, to encounter truth, things like that. Truth is a value. Many people hold that to be very important. But like the actual study of the element of truth per se, I'd say is quite an obscure area. Then we have the element of belief. And again, mostly I would say this element of this classic definition of knowledge is largely assumed. It's largely just saying, okay, you either believe that you can have knowledge or not. And I'll talk in a minute about the skeptics a little more, but skeptics, for example, would say, you know, maybe the classical academic skeptics, you cannot have knowledge. But other people say, well, you can have knowledge, and the way we have it is through belief. If you know something, then you believe it. And belief corresponds with truth. It's our human connection, the knower's connection to the known is through belief. It's an assent of the intellect. It's a conviction of things. It's an assurance or kind of intellectual assent to that is the case. So there's kind of some sort of relationship to the truth. And belief, I'll say, you know, it will go, I think maybe that's a good place to start. So the skeptics, as I was saying, skepticism has run its throughout the centuries. People who really maybe don't believe that knowledge is real. I say one of the things it ties into is this ideas about confidence and certainty. Like, how certain does knowledge have to be to constitute knowledge? Does it have to be omniscient? Does it have to be truly perfectly accurate in some way? Or is it like kind of more contextual, like, yeah, within what I'm talking about, I know something to be the case. That's, you know, what degree of certainty is required. Most people believe, I'll say, in knowledge. Skepticism, it gets a little tenuous. I mean, you know, it's a fun game to play, but like, I think it does become a little problematic. I don't know too much about Pyrrhonian skepticism. Maybe it's a little more sophisticated, in a little more balanced, right? Like I said, about, you know, an approach to life, a philosophy. But this element of belief, though, like, I would say a good way to approach it is through the development of rationalism and empiricism. So classic rationalist was René Descartes around the year 1600, Jesuit, you know, raised by, you know, educated by Jesuits, obviously a very intelligent person. He wrote the Meditations in about a day or two upon retirement. So obviously he had thought about this for many years, and then he just sat down one day and wrote it out. And that's one of the most greatest classic texts in epistemology in history that we have. And so in that book, René Descartes kind of, you know, he begins with some of the classic stuff. Well, like, let's look at optical illusions. Let's look at dreams. You know, when you're waking or sleeping, do you really know? You know, we can be misled in our senses. And he kind of is saying, listen, I've been misled in my life. I had all these beliefs that I thought for sure were true, and now I don't know. I need to tear it all down. I need to go through a disciplined practice to destroy every single belief that I hold. And then I'm gonna, you know, once I'm thoroughly destroyed every belief within myself, then I'm gonna see where if I can build up to something that's like on a strong foundation sort of thing, right? And he comes to this sort of conclusion of rationalism, which is basically people have kind of sort of innate knowledge through these clear and distinct ideas. So he gives some examples of how, first of all, he broke down his knowledge. And one of the kind of final straws is the story of the demon. It's kind of a mind scenario where what if all of our knowledge is implanted in our mind by an evil demon and we're being misled? And so Rene Descartes, of course, comes up with, with a couple of key thoughts for him, is that we can have these clear and distinct ideas, and one of the most important ones for Rene Descartes, and I would say fairly not discussed commonly in academic literature, is his belief in God. For Rene Descartes, he takes a sort of a view of Anselm, that God is that than which no greater can be thought. God is that than which no greater can be thought. So he thinks that the very fact that we have a concept of a God, that there is this ever greater being, more and more and more, ever greater than, that we can have this thought of God that is evidence of the existence of God. And Rene Descartes also, he comes up with some other kind of fundamental beliefs, but basically rationalism is this sort of notion that we have some sort of innate ideas in our minds, and these are clear and distinct ideas that we know. And like mathematical, geometric concepts, these sort of abstract, rational ideas. Now, come along John Locke, a great representative of empiricism, which is a bit of a different approach. John Locke sort of talked about the tabula rasa, the blank slate, that we are like born into this world and it's all like static, like everything's random sensory information, and we begin to sort patterns and begin to see objects and begin to perceive things and make sense of things. John Locke talks about intuition, like realizing that a circle is not a square, or he also talks about deductive proofs, wonderful examples of deductive proofs and coming to deduce knowledge through proofs, through disciplined formal proofs, and also sensory knowledge or sensory kind of experience. And so rationalism is emphasizes more so those knowledge through experience, basically. But again, where I'm talking, I'm kind of classifying all these into the belief area. So beliefs, when people talk about their beliefs, I'll say a good view is that everybody has beliefs. Maybe it's not a popular, nice thing to say, but like we look when philosophy is analyzing people, people have assumptions, right? Underneath, in the formal argument, you have the conclusion at the bottom or on top, and behind the conclusion you have premises or assumptions, that these assumptions result in the conclusion, right? And so people maintain statements, and it seems that there do seem to be reasons or premises underneath these reasons. Sometimes those premises are examined, sometimes not, but people hold them. For example, I believe in what I can see. Right? That right there is a great example of a belief. You can't see that belief. Or something is true if it's either empirically verifiable or true by definition. So either something is true by definition, like triangle has three sides, or it's empirically verifiable. That's how I know something. But that statement itself is not true by definition or empirically verifiable. It's a kind of a belief, really. And people seem to have beliefs. Some of them are more subjective. I'll say, like, people say, listen, I have this experience of truth. I know for sure it's like coincidence. It's like correspondence. It's like everything, the stars just lined up and it presented itself as truth and it said it was truth and I experienced it as truth, and it just, I know in my heart and in my bones, it's the truth. I just know it. I feel it, like this spiritual experience. I am connected with it. I know this for sure. And so this sort of subjective kind of personal experience of truth, seems to be some people's belief, right? And other people, I would emphasize more authority. Now, authority is an interesting one because the classic logical fallacy of argument from authority, right, is saying, this is not a logical way of thinking. But actually, a lot of arguments and people's beliefs do come from authority. And this is often underappreciated, how much of our beliefs come from the authority of scientists or a group of medical professionals, or narratives that are given in society as being the right ones, or in our community. Listen, you have to do this. Like, we will not cut you off from money. You will have a brutal time, but just get in line. This is what we're telling you is the truth, okay? And those conspiracy, like there's some kind of conspiracy with those people, but my authorities, like, they're the good ones. Like, if my people tell me this, then like I'm all on board with it, right? So argument from authority does, I think, play a pretty massive role in people's beliefs, and I think it's quite underappreciated by people who tend to emphasize the subjective experience of their beliefs and their experience of truth. I'll say that those are two pretty big areas, and they're not necessarily in conflict with one another, but I find some people do emphasize one more than the other. Most people, the common narrative is that it's better to focus on your own experience and your own thoughts and rely on your own mind. And the criticism of that, of course, is that, individuals can be faulty. Are you going to believe in your own experience, or are you going to anecdotal experience, or are you going to take the authority of this organization here who's saying, all these people are having these experiences and this is the way it is, right? Of course, they're maybe telling a narrative too. Third element of this definition of knowledge is justification. Go back to the Pharoneans, for instance. One of the concepts that the Pharonean skeptics, who were saying, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, pointed out that, there's different kinds of justification. And a few of them seem to be, maybe that justification is through foundationalism. And maybe it's through infinite regress, and maybe it's through kind of cohesion or correspondence. And the foundationalist has probably been the majority view of a lot of people, that what we use to justify our beliefs, the reasons we give that constitute knowledge for a true belief, is that the conclusion is based on a premise, and that premise is based on another premise, but at some point there's a foundational premise, a foundational truth that can't be reduced any further. These are axioms. They're fundamental truths. They're basic, and you kind of go beyond them. For example, Aristotle has a great section on the law of non-contradiction, the logical law of non-contradiction, that a thing cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. It either is or it is not. There's no kind of both being and not being in the same respect. So he goes on at some length saying, you cannot prove this. You cannot go deeper than that. It's just fundamental. And if you don't agree with it, then just jump into a pit. Classic Aristotle, right? Just jump into a pit. Jump into a well, he says. Jump into a well. It doesn't matter if it is and it is not. It doesn't make a difference. So just jump into a well. It matters, it either is or is not. The problem that the Freudian skeptic Agrippa's trilemma brings up with foundationalism is, of course, it's like, well, what's the justification for this fundamental belief? It might be more than that. I'm not super familiar with the concepts. The other one is the infinite regress, so the belief that maybe each knowledge that a person has, so if you have a knowledge, or you know something, or you know someone, that is built upon a premise or a building block, and that premise itself has premises, and those premises have premises, and they go back forever, infinitely. And most philosophers in history say you cannot have an infinite regress. It means it's wrong. You're doing something wrong there, right? You can't have that. It's not. And I think part of it might be the question of actual infinity. And again, most people say, can you really have an actual infinity? Probably not. Like, could you actually divide space in the universe into an infinite number, an actually infinitely small number of pieces? Say, no, probably there is fundamental reality. Or can you have an actually infinitely large object, or like a ruler that's infinitely large to measure an infinite space? Or can you have an actual infinity number, like a number that's actually infinite? And it's like, well, no, it's like these are ideas. It's like a theoretical infinity, but is there an actual infinity? And so the infinite regress, one of of course, the criticism is that, well, you can't have that, right? But I guess one of the answers was sort of through calculus, and which is a fairly modern mathematical science, surprisingly involved with the discovery of electricity. The whole concept of calculus is pretty recent, actually. And so in calculus, you can have like things approaching infinity, right? Like slopes that get closer and closer and closer, and then go on for infinity. And so in that idea, each regressive premise has less explanatory power of the conclusion, and further away they explain less and less until you approach, as you approach infinity, the certainty of that knowledge approaches 1.0 or 100% certainty. Maybe never quite reaches perfect certainty, but the premises can sort of go on forever theoretically, right? Then I don't know how much people believe in infinite regression, though. I'd say probably, again, the majority view doesn't really go too much on that, saying that we know things because of an infinite number of beliefs underlying those beliefs. The last one is the kind of cohesion theory, where our statements of knowledge are sort of like in a web or network with different kinds of relationships. And don't get someone started trying to like define all those kinds of relationships, but basically the idea is like, one belief here corresponds with another belief here, kind of matches another belief here. This one is not so consistent, so maybe it doesn't fit into the network, or the network is flexible enough to include it. Some kind of cohesive theories may be very rigid, like a little island of beliefs, maybe like a conspiracy theory. These beliefs all make sense. They all point to, oh, really, there's someone over there that, there's a conspiracy. Those people are misleading everyone, and this is the actual truth here. But, they're kind of disconnected from the broader, knowledge systems of maybe mainstream or whatever, or an intellectual elite or the in-group or whatever. But so that would be like another saying, like, okay, like even like in evolutionary theories, okay, our perceptions of reality are connected to our survival in reality. So there is some sort of kind of correspondence or connection between our sensory perception and the environment. And that makes sense because of this and that, so like these kind of just like all connected, right? The problem, and that was interesting. I don't know too much about the problem with this theory, but I think again it may go back to this question of what's found, like what's the authority of it. I mean, is it like someone says this is true, so it's true, or is it true because it's true? Stuff like that, right? So again, those are kind of like a broad stroke summary of kinds of justifications. And maybe I'll stop there. I don't know where else to go here. I think maybe I'll briefly mention Gettier cases. So after these theories of justification, so yeah, there's two things I should mention actually. So this definition of true justified belief has been criticized in a couple ways. The first way is asking, what does justification add to knowledge? Because you cannot justify the truth. Okay, in the first place, the truth doesn't need justification, okay? The truth is the truth. It doesn't care if you believe in it or not. I mean, maybe it cares, I have no idea, but it's like, it doesn't need defense. It just is what it is, right? So you don't justify the truth. Like, the truth would maybe inform us as people, but why do we need to justify knowledge? Like, what does the justification add, to our certainty? Either you know something or you don't. So some people would criticize, say, well, listen, knowledge is just true belief. You could, and that is distinct from a lucky guess. Because it's important to point that out. If you flip a coin and put a cup on top of the coin, you say, oh, I think it's the heads. The heads are up. Turn up. Oh, yes, I'm right. I knew it. No, you didn't really believe the heads were up. You just guessed. You just made a gamble. You made a, maybe it's like that, right? You didn't actually believe it. But if you actually believe something, it's not just a lucky guess, and it's true, maybe it doesn't matter what reasons you have, you're just right or wrong. You have knowledge or you don't, right? So that was the first approach. I would say generally through late 1900s, that view was pretty obscure. People don't agree with that. I would say maybe it's more popular now. I don't know. Then we have, of course, well, not only is knowledge true justified belief, but you need another element beyond justification plus something else. And this was came out of Gettier, 1963. Edmund Gettier, I think, wrote a paper. Just Gettier. I can't remember his first name. He wrote a paper where he gave a couple examples, and there's a lot of old stories that are similar to these examples, but he gave an example of a clock. A man is walking through a train station, and he says, what time is it? He looks up and sees a clock, and the clock says noon. And in fact, and here's the epistemology point, it is in fact noon. So that's the granted, okay? It's actually factually true that it's noon. He looks at the clock, it says 12 o'clock, and so he has knowledge, right? It's true that it's 12 o'clock. He believes it's 12 o'clock, and he has a justification, pretty good justification for his belief. But it so happens that clock is broken. It just happened to have stopped 2 days before at that exact moment. So does he have knowledge that it's 12 o'clock? And so many philosophers look at this and say, actually, no. He needs a justification, and just a justification is not good enough. He needs something else. He needs a reliable justification. Maybe they use words like indefeasibility, and maybe it can't, like you can maybe some sort of counterfactual that you would have to you could rely on that clock. And so they start to add, like, well, there has to be a reliability of the justification. So then a whole bunch of theories emerged out of that, and they got very obtuse. But obtuse, is that the right word? Sorry, I forget. Causal theories, like, okay, even if you can't explain your justification. Like, how do you know what the tallest mountain in the world is? Is it Mount Everest? I don't even know what the tallest mountain is, but let's say it's Mount Everest. Oh, I know Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. How do you know that? Well, I don't actually remember who told me. I think I heard it somewhere, maybe in school, maybe someone measured it using some sort of instrument, and then they wrote it in a book, and then someone wrote a news article about the book, and then that got into the school curriculum, and so on and so on. Someone said it, and then I heard it, and then, that's fair enough. Hey, why not, right? There is a causal connection in the knowledge, a legitimate, acceptable causal connection. And even if you can't explain how you know something, how do you know the earth is round, or how do you know whatever, that's fair enough. There was a legitimate causal connection that caused you to have that knowledge, right? So all these kinds of theories like causal reliabilism and different things like that all began to emerge And yeah, so maybe we can stop there. But basically, the broad scape of it is that we have a lot of epistemology is talking about knowledge as true, justified belief, and that justification, it really does branch out from there, talking about degrees of certainty, mathematical certainties, and, how we know things through our senses, how we know things through hearsay, which is a huge topic. Oh, I saw that person, he was the one who hit that other person, and people have faulty memory, and how reliable is that knowledge, and bias, like all this stuff is all in there in study of knowledge, right? So psychology, everything, right? It really branches out from there, but basically the focus is on what is knowledge, what constitutes knowledge. And people generally define knowledge as true, justified belief, with the big emphasis being on justification. And maybe what they might be getting at is that the justification element is somehow justifying the truth. And again, I don't know if that's a legitimate thing to do, but maybe they're sort of indirectly trying to say, well, we can't know the truth. What is the truth? Or maybe they're just taking the truth for granted, and then they're just trying to justify their own knowledge. And then, so the question is, like, what's the connection between knowledge and truth? Which kind of comes first, and things like that. Do we know something's true because someone with knowledge tells us, or, etc. So, well, thanks for listening, guys. I know it's a long video, just talking random stuff about philosophy, but there you go. Have a great rest of your day.